In 1955, the space race kicked off. It terminated with Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon and planting an American flag on it. Since then, not much has been done about the dark, empty space our planet floats in. But all that is starting to change due to the work of Elon Musk. You see, Elon Musk has a dream, and his dream is to take mankind into space and help mankind colonize it. This dream may seem far off, really, and it is, because space is really, really, really far. So far, you need a really, really super heavy rocket to even get into it. However, no matter how far a thing is, you can get there if you have $1 billion in funding and some of the smartest people the world has ever seen working for you. About a month ago, Musk made progress on his plan to help us colonize space. What progress, you ask? Well, progress on the massive, super heavy booster that's supposed to carry his Starship into space. Hey, wait, rewind. What's a super heavy booster in the first place? It's basically a super heavy lift launch vehicle that's able to lift over 100 tons of payload into low Earth orbit. Basically, this is the sort of rocket that you build when you want to launch something extremely heavy into orbit. Something like a commercial spaceship. Which, as you know, is one of the things SpaceX is looking to do in the next few years. The company wants Starship, the company's reusable Starship, to one day carry human cargo to space. And not just to space. SpaceX also plans to use Starship to take people to places like Mars. So far, SpaceX has released a few prototypes of what it expects Starship to look like. The Starship will have to be large enough to carry about 100 people to the moon at least. That means that it would need to have gigantic rocket thrusters. SpaceX Super Heavy Booster is set to be really big too. In fact, it's taller than an entire Falcon Heavy Rocket and is set to be the largest liquid rocket booster ever built. According to Musk, the rocket will have twice the thrust of the Saturn V rocket that took the Apollo astronauts to the moon. Aside from that, Musk has also told the world that the rocket will have 28 Raptor engines. The point of all these super heavy boosters is a really big deal. If it works, it's going to be a huge boost, both literally and figuratively, for SpaceX and Elon Musk. And if it doesn't, it's going to be a super heavy letdown. But let's put a pin in that. Let's talk about the second stage of the vehicle, the Starship. Why? Well, so far tests have only been carried out on the Starship, not the booster. So, what about the tests? Have they gone well, or have they gone really bad? The truth is that while some tests have been a bit disappointing, there are still important things to be learned in the process. SpaceX's first 4 prototypes were destroyed in ground tests. It's the 6th prototype. The prototype SN8 never actually completed a hop test. In fact, the event was eventually scrubbed for undisclosed reasons. However, prototype serial number 5 wasn't a disaster at all. It managed to complete a hop test. That is, it flew to an altitude of about 140 meters and landed on another pad. Then there was also serial number 7.1 prototype. However, that was destroyed on purpose. The tank was meant to go through pressure tests that were supposed to take it to bursting point. Basically, it was going to be tested to failure. And it eventually failed. But this was a success in Musk's eyes. The purpose of the SN 7.1 tank was to learn its limits and to see how SpaceX could better design it. The data learned from the test will certainly be useful. And now, SpaceX is moving on to prototype serial number 8. According to Musk, SN8 will be very ambitious and will attempt a 20-kilometer flight. If all goes well, the prototype will launch and then return to a launch pad. It will also be the first Starship to break the sound barrier. It's important to note that this will be way higher than the heights of the SN5 prototype reached. Even Musk said that it was going to be uncharted territory. And if Elon Musk says a territory is uncharted, it sure is uncharted. However, before the SN8 will be cleared to go on this historic flight, it will have to go through several tests. The first major challenge will be to pass through a series of tests known as cryogenic proof. It will first be pressurized with ambient temperature nitrogen gas to check for leaks, and then it will be fully filled with liquid nitrogen, while hydraulic rams subject it to thrust puck and engine sections to stresses similar to the thrust of 3 Raptor engines. Basically, it will first be tested to see if it will explode during the flight. It will pass through flight conditions, and if it comes out unscathed, it will be cleared to go through a static fire test. A static fire test is a test where the engines for the rocket are put on for about 5 seconds to see whether the vehicle can handle it. A static fire test will be taken 2 times and will be done with 3 Raptor engines. If the tests are successful, the SN8 will be cleared to go into orbit. Another important feature of the SN8 flight is it will be complete with nose cones and flaps to enable it to reach the higher altitudes that SpaceX wants to reach. Given SpaceX's penchant for failing to succeed, lots of people aren't optimistic about the SN8 test. They expect that it will fail and then SpaceX will have to do further reconfigurations before it will actually make the flight. And now for the second part of the entire program, the Super Heavy booster. The Super Heavy is the booster stage that the Starship needs to be able to escape the gravity well that is Earth. As the name implies, the Super Heavy is pretty huge. It's expected to be about 72 meters long and is said to be 9 meters in diameter, with a gross liftoff mass of 3,680,000 kilograms, and will be holding subcooled liquid methane and liquid oxygen propellants. It will also be powered by 28 Raptor engines that will provide 72,000 kilonewtons total liftoff thrust. The first prototype of the Heavy booster will be full size. However, we expect that it will first fly with only about 20 engines, not the 28 that the booster is supposed to have. All through 2019 and the early months of 2020, the design of the Heavy booster changed as was iterated and its Raptor engines went through heavy testing. In August 2020, it was reported that the first build of the Booster Prototype 1 was underway. But where would this booster be built? It's pretty huge, and it needs to be stacked vertically. This means it would need to be a pretty tall warehouse to be stacked in. That's the problem that SpaceX foresaw a long while ago. That's why they began building the huge high bays, also known as Vehicle Vertical Assembly Builds or VABs, in January of 2020. The high bay is about 80 meters tall, just tall enough to cover the booster. Since the Heavy booster has to be built vertically, SpaceX constructed special VABs that are just as tall as the Heavy booster. Now that the VAB has been concluded, the work to create the first Heavy booster prototype can now begin in full steam. But how likely is it that SpaceX Super Heavy lift launch vehicle will be successful? To understand the challenges facing Musk and his team, we have to look at the past. There have been 6 attempts in history to build a viable Super Heavy lift launch vehicle, and only 3 of those attempts have been successful. They are the Space Shuttle, the Saturn V, which took humans to the moon, and the Soviet Energia. As far as the other 3 attempts are concerned, 2 remained unproven and 1 failed to leave Earth after 4 attempts. To make things more difficult for Musk and his team, he's attempting to create a Super Heavy lift launch vehicle that is fully reusable. Only 1 successful Super Heavy lift launch vehicle has ever been reusable, and it was only partially reusable, and that rocket was NASA's Space Shuttle. Basically, SpaceX and Musk are in uncharted territory. They are attempting what has never been done before, and it doesn't look like they're the only ones. NASA, China and Russia all have plans to launch their own Super Heavy lift launch vehicle in the coming years. We don't know yet about the details of these vehicles, but we know that they are in development. Musk and SpaceX may be leading the space charge, but they certainly aren't the only ones trying to conquer the frontiers of space. In the 1960s, the space race kicked off and the power centers of the world raced one another to the finish line, landing a man on the moon. But since those glory days, we've done little to nothing about the dark empty space our planet floats in. Today, people like Elon are leading the second space race, and it appears that this one may be more expensive and more exciting than the first. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to smash the like and subscribe button. Goodbye, and remember to stay safe.